Zoe Sinclair was the type of person who made lists for her lists. Her backpack was always zipped, her notes were color-coded, and her calendar shared with her roommate, and updated religiously rarely had a blank square. She was the one professors counted on to remind the class about deadlines. The one who walked campus with earbuds in and a face that said, "Don't waste my time." Her friends joked she could schedule her funeral before dying and still be 5 minutes early. So when Zoe didn't show up for her 80A ethics seminar on Monday, nobody panicked. Not at first. Cassie Archer, her roommate of 2 years, noticed it first. Their shared dorm room was still exactly how they'd left it. Sunday night neat, beds made, Zoe's laptop charging beside her unopened textbook. It wasn't unusual for Zoe to pull all-nighters at the library. But she always came back by morning. Always. By lunchtime, Cassie had checked the library, the coffee shop, the study hall, even Zoe's favorite empty classroom on the 3rd floor of the humanities building. No one had seen her. The weight of the absence started to sink in like a bad dream. She texted. She called. She even checked Zoe's Instagram. Nothing posted in 16 hours. That was unheard of. By early evening, Cassie gave in and called campus security. She's not the type to just disappear. She insisted. The officer at the desk, clearly bored, offered her a lazy half smile and said, "She's probably just crashed at a friend's place. Midterms." Right, Cassie hated how easily he dismissed it. Zoe was missing. Something was off. She could feel it. She went back to their dorm and waited, pretending to study but checking the door every time she heard footsteps in the hall. At 2 a.m., she finally called Zoe's parents. Michael and Karen Sinclair were on a plane by 7 a.m. Phoenix to Ridgeway wasn't a short trip, but they didn't hesitate. As the flight took off, Karen stared out the window, clutching Zoe's childhood bracelet in her hand, her mind spiraling into every possibility. Zoe had never done anything reckless in her life. No drugs, no bad parties, no toxic relationships. She was solid, predictable. That's what scared them the most, because if someone like Zoe could vanish, it meant someone else had made her vanish. Detective Mara Ellison got the file the next day. It was her 6th missing persons case that year, and most had ended the same way. Walkaways, false alarms, or breakups turned ghost stories. But this one didn't feel like that. Zoe's friends were tight-knit. No one had heard from her. No calls, no texts. Her phone pinged one last time at 2:13 a.m. on Sunday morning. After that, it went cold. No data, no usage. It hadn't been turned on since. No contact in 36 hours. Mara told the precinct captain, "That's not a lost phone. That's a blackout." They interviewed everyone. Tyler Kane, Zoe's boyfriend of 8 months, said she'd seemed stressed lately, but nothing unusual. He admitted they'd fought earlier in the week about her pulling back. She was in full tunnel vision mode. It happens when she's overwhelmed. He looked wrecked, but his alibi checked out. Cassie was grilled twice. She was cooperative, but anxious, spiraling into guilt. I should have made her text me when she left the library. She said, "We always check in." The RAs were questioned. Professors, friends. Everyone had the same version. Zoe had left the library alone, around 1:50 walking toward the dorms. A 10-minute walk, tops. Somewhere in those 10 minutes, she vanished. The barista at Ground Floor Cafe was the only person outside Zoe's inner circle who might have seen her. It was late. I was working the overnight shift. I saw a girl pacing outside, talking on the phone. She kept looking around, nervous. At one point, she made eye contact with me. Looked like she wanted to say something. Then she just turned and walked away. The barista only realized it was Zoe when her photo hit the news. But by then, it was too late. CCTV footage was a joke. The nearest working camera on campus was pointed at a maintenance lot and caught nothing. The street lamp near the cafe flickered every other second, casting jagged shadows over the sidewalk. Mara had the IT team pull everything from surrounding buildings, but the timestamps either missed Zoe or were too blurry to confirm anything. No vehicle sightings, no suspect movement, just grainy silence. The last trace of Zoe was the phone signal ping at 2:13 a.m. That narrowed her location to a few blocks, an area with half-lit alleys, empty maintenance sheds, and a crumbling freight yard on the edge of campus nobody had touched in years. The search parties were massive at first. Volunteers flooded in, students, faculty, local police. For 3 days, they combed every inch of the south end of campus, the freight yard, the woods, the ravine. Cadaver dogs picked up nothing. Helicopters flew overhead. Mara authorized drones. Zoe's parents clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd hit her head, wandered off, and was lying somewhere dazed and alive. But every hour that passed dimmed that hope further. By day 6, the media showed up. Zoe's photo was everywhere. Blonde, brown eyes, a bright smile that made the story worse. Reporters flocked to Ridgeway's front gates like vultures. Every lead went nowhere. The pressure mounted. How does a girl disappear 10 minutes from her dorm? Karen Sinclair asked at the press conference. How can no one see her? Behind the scenes, Mara fought to keep the investigation afloat. The department was stretched thin, and the media attention was making higher-ups nervous. They wanted a breakthrough or a body, preferably both, but nothing turned up. No ransom note, no clothing, no witnesses. It was like Zoe had been erased. The only concrete detail, one that stuck with Mara, was the cafe sighting. Zoe on the phone, looking like she wanted to speak. That split second of hesitation, that look. Mara had chased dozens of missing persons cases, but this one gnawed at her. The kind of case that lives under your skin, whispering questions in the middle of the night. Where was Zoe Sinclair? And why did she look scared before she vanished? Detective Mara Ellison stood in front of the whiteboard in her office, red string already connecting the pins on Zoe Sinclair's timeline. A photo of Zoe smiling in front of Ridgeway's clock tower was centered like a target. Surrounding it were images, a grainy still from outside Ground Floor Cafe, a map of the South Quad, a printout of Zoe's class schedule, and a screenshot of her last phone ping. No one said it out loud, but everyone working the case was thinking the same thing. It wasn't just a disappearance. Someone had taken her. The missing persons playbook was familiar to Mara. Start with the inner circle. Statistically, it was almost always someone the victim knew. Zoe's parents had already been cleared, alibis airtight, flight records matching timelines. Her roommate, Cassie, had been home, texting Zoe until 1:45 a.m. before falling asleep. She handed over her phone willingly. Her text history with Zoe showed nothing unusual that night. They joked about a professor's haircut, then silence. Tyler Kane, the boyfriend, had been more complicated. He was jittery in interviews, arms crossed, bouncing one knee constantly. I didn't even know she went to the library that late. He said during the second round of questioning, I thought she was asleep. I didn't text. We weren't really talking that day. His alibi crashing at his fraternity house checked out, though just barely. Several brothers vouched for him. One said Tyler had been drinking and passed out by 1 a.m. It was enough for Mara to move on, but not enough to feel right. Then came the digital crawl. Ridgeway IT pulled Zoe's laptop history and email records. Everything was normal. Assignments submitted. Study guides downloaded. One flagged email from a TA asking about a paper. That was it. Her social media showed typical college fare, sunlit photos, filtered selfies, scattered tweets about law school stress. Nothing even hinting at danger, except for the phone records. Zoe's final call, the one she was on outside the cafe, was never logged by her carrier. No outgoing call, no incoming call. It hadn't been a text either. Just a single data ping at 2:13 a.m. right after the barista said she walked away. That was it. Mara had text double check, triple check. The call didn't exist unless it had been made using a secondary phone. Campus security swept the area where she was last seen, hoping to find dropped items, anything. They found an earring, later confirmed not to be Zoe's, cigarette butts, an empty coffee cup. Useless. No trace of her phone, no torn clothing, no drag marks. The freight yard was checked again, more thoroughly. Still nothing. After 10 days, the case began to rot from the inside. News vans left. Volunteers thinned. The Sinclair family held a vigil outside the administration building. Students lit candles and posted "Odds bring Zoe home" across every inch of social media. But leads dried up, witnesses went silent, no suspects emerged, and without a body, there was no crime anyone could officially charge. Mara hated that part. With no clear evidence of foul play, she couldn't push for warrants on weak suspicions. The Deep A was already pressuring her to scale back the task force. Missing doesn't mean murdered, he reminded her in a closed-door meeting. We don't prosecute people for bad luck, but this wasn't bad luck. Not to Mara. Zoe didn't vanish. Someone made her disappear. So Mara went hunting for ghosts. She returned to Ridgeway after hours, walking the same path Zoe likely took that night. From the library, past the lit quad, down toward the cafe. The air was colder than she expected. At night, Ridgeway's manicured campus turned eerie shadows warping across sculptures, silence broken only by the buzz of distant street lamps. When she reached the cafe, she stood exactly where Zoe was spotted pacing. She looked up, the camera pointing down at the alley. It had been dismissed earlier. Too distant. Too low res. But Mara requested the raw file anyway. And there it was. A vehicle. Faint headlights rolling past at 2 on. 4 minutes before Zoe's final phone ping. It didn't stop, just slowed. The frame rate was terrible, but the shape was unmistakable: a van. Large, boxy, no visible plate, possibly blue or gray. It crept down the back service road, then vanished off camera in just a few seconds. Barely a blip, but enough to mark. Campus security hadn't caught it, but now it was all Mara could think about. She pulled DMV records, cross-referenced students, faculty, and staff with registered van owners. Too many hits. She tried narrowing it to anyone with priors, anyone recently disciplined or expelled. That's when she found Eric Ralston. Ralston had been a Ridgeway graduate student in behavioral psych, expelled in 2015 for harassment, multiple complaints, and one involved stalking a female student. No charges were filed. The student dropped out. Ralston disappeared from campus life, just a blot on an HR spreadsheet. Mara requested the file. Inside was a copy of the complaint, redacted except for the summary. The victim had reported being followed home, receiving emails from a burner account, finding notes on her windshield. But the handwriting sample attached triggered something in Mara. She'd seen it before in Zoe's notebook, left open on her desk the night she vanished. A sticky note stuck between the pages. Not in Zoe's writing, "You light up every room. It's hard to look away." Zoe had joked about it earlier in the semester. Cassie had said, "Some guy with an awkward crush, maybe from her psych elective." She brushed it off, thought it was harmless. Mara didn't. Ralston fit the timeline. He'd been expelled 2 years earlier, but still had access to campus from the surrounding area. The van, the silence, the obsession. It was too aligned to ignore, but with no current address and no known employment, Ralston was a phantom. Mara requested a trace on his last known bank activity. Nothing in 18 months, no social media, no medical records. It was like he'd gone completely off the grid. Still, the thread was there. She pinned Ralston's name to the board. Below the van photo, connected by red string. Find him. She told her team, start there. Because if Zoe was scared that night, if she hesitated at the cafe, looked at that barista like she wanted to speak, maybe she had recognized someone, and maybe that someone had followed her for longer than anyone realized. By the third week, Zoe Sinclair's face had become a symbol not just on campus, but citywide. Her senior photo, chosen for flyers, showed her wearing a navy blazer, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her smile confident and unforced. Beneath it, bold letters read, "Missing. Last seen. Oct. 8-2 Raro A. M." And under that, the chilling part, any information call, dit, Mari Ellison. Flyers flapped from power poles. Her face flickered on news tickers. But none of it changed the reality. No new leads, no suspects located, no further sightings. Zoe had vanished without a trace, and the world was starting to move on. But not Mara. She couldn't let it go. Every cold case had a tipping point the moment where the world stops caring, and only the family and one stubborn detective remain. This case hadn't tipped yet, but Mara could feel the weight leaning, and she wasn't going to let it fall. She returned to Ridgeway campus every few days, unofficially, revisiting Zoe's steps like a ritual. The campus, so alive in the daytime, transformed into something eerie by nightfall. The lights felt too dim, the shadows too long. Zoe had walked that path at the exact wrong hour. The freight yard stood just beyond the southern edge of campus. Once part of a busy industrial loop, it had been decommissioned years ago now, just rusted fences and crumbling warehouses. Most students avoided it. The buildings were hollowed out, stripped for copper, spray painted with tags and half-burned beer cans. But to Mara, it felt too close, too convenient. Zoe's last phone ping had placed her near that quadrant, and that van captured by the grainy cafe camera had headed in that direction. So Mara pushed for a second search of the yard. This time, she brought cadaver dogs, crime scene techs, and 2 trusted officers from her original unit. They combed every inch of ground beneath the loading bays, behind stacked pallets, inside locked containers. They dug shallow holes, scanned with thermal cameras, even swept the air vents of the old switch office. Nothing. No blood, no clothing, no signs of life or death. Still, something felt wrong. The buildings were too clean, like someone had scrubbed them not recently, but deliberately. Any potential hiding spots had been cleared out, as if someone had prepped the site in advance. One of the techs called Mara over. Check this out. Behind a stack of rusted chain-link fencing was a concrete wall with scorch marks. Burned something here. Maybe a trash barrel? Mara pulled on gloves, shifted debris. Mixed in with the ash were fragments of what might have been cloth, too far gone for identification. They bagged it anyway. Back at the lab, nothing viable came from the samples. No DNA, no trace evidence. Still, the presence of a fire site deepened Mara's suspicion. Fires destroyed things. Evidence, messages. She began building a timeline. and Zoe finishes up at the library, leaves alone. 150A. Text Cassie, says walking back now. Dead tired. 20A. Barista sees Zoe pacing outside the cafe on the phone. 209AA. Unidentified van seen driving past on alley cam. 2:13 a.m. Final data ping from Zoe's phone. Then silence. The 10-minute walk from the library to her dorm should have taken at most 8 minutes. But something delayed her. A phone call, a confrontation, a moment of doubt. And then the black hole. Mara returned to the idea of the phone. Zoe's carrier showed no calls made at that time. So who was she talking to? Burner, phone, Wi-Fi call, app-to-app audio. Maybe Mara had techs run a scan for encrypted app, use WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, but the phone had been wiped at the moment of shutdown, like someone had disabled it remotely or used a device meant to erase signals. That wasn't a panicked grab. That was planning. Whoever took Zoe hadn't just acted on impulse. Mara called a meeting with Ridgeway's IT lead, asking if any school-issued network data had recorded Zoe's device at that time. Sometimes Wi-Fi logs picked up a ghost ping, even from locked screens. It was a long shot. The tech got back to her 2 days later. There was one unusual record. At 2:12, Zoe's device had connected just for 4 seconds to a guest router near the edge of the south lot. The signal was weak, but logged a specific MAC address, which Mara confirmed as Zoe's. That location right across the street from the freight yard. She stared at the map, heart hammering. The freight yard wasn't just a theory anymore. It was part of the sequence. The van, the phone, the fire, all of it pointed to the yard. She pulled old property records. The land was technically owned by a dormant freight company, which had leased storage units on the property to private individuals. One unit, warehouse 6B, had been leased from 2016 through early 2018 under the name Jared Niles, a fake identity traced to a dead address and an expired credit card. But the billing address used for the contract, it linked back to a mailbox center in rural Connecticut, and that address had been used previously by Eric Ralston. It was the break Mara needed. She dug deeper. Ralston had used the same fake ID to sign up for utilities in an off-grid cabin near the New York border. He'd made a few obscure online purchases through Bitcoin survival gear, burner phones, and a prepaid data plan under the alias C. Monroe. Zoe's final moments weren't just the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were a destination. Whoever took her had stalked her path, mapped her routine, known when and where she walked. The fact that the freight yard had been scrubbed clean pointed to foresight. But people who plan leave patterns, and patterns can be broken open. Mara sent out a federal alert for Ralston, flagged every burner phone purchased in the state over the last 2 years, cross-checked all van purchases in tri-state counties matching the cafe footage. Most of it was stone cold, but one hit came back on a prepaid phone purchased under the name C. Monroe, active just once in October 2017, registered to a short-term plan, then immediately deactivated. It had pinged a tower 0.4 miles from Ridgeway campus. At 2:11 and October 8th, right before Zoe's final phone connection. The audio was brittle, fuzzy around the edges, warped by age and poor signal. It had been buried on an old flip phone, one of those prepaid burners that hadn't been powered on in years. Detective Mar Ellison held the cheap plastic in her palm like it was a relic, because in some ways it was. Zoe, Sinclair's voice crackled through the tiny speaker. No. Stop. Please, I don't know. You. A thud. Static. A sound like fabric against metal. Then silence. The timestamp read 2:13 October 8th, 2017. The exact moment Zoe disappeared. Mara froze. 5 years. 5 years of empty leads, dry tips, bad guesses, and sleepless nights. And suddenly, here it was. Her voice. The last seconds. A breadcrumb in the dark. The phone had turned up by accident. Cassie Archer, Zoe's former roommate, had been cleaning out her parents' attic over the holidays and came across a shoebox of old tech. Inside, tangled cords, dead earbuds, and a small navy flip phone that neither she nor Zoe had ever used seriously. It had no SIM card, no charger, just a dead screen. Cassie almost threw it away, but curiosity won out. She ordered a charger online, plugged it in. The screen blinked to life, and with it, a single saved voicemail from October 8th. Cassie listened once, then dropped the phone, hand shaking. She called Mara that night. Mara took it straight to the lab. Forensics worked quickly. They extracted the audio, cleaned it. What emerged was haunting Zoe's voice in mid-panic, followed by muffled noises that could be footsteps, maybe a scuffle, and under that something mechanical, a metallic clang, possibly a car door or a trunk. Mara played it over and over. The voicemail hadn't been left on purpose. It had auto-saved from a failed call. Prepaid phones like that one sometimes captured voicemail if a call connected, but didn't complete. The call had likely gone to voicemail at the exact moment Zoe screamed and recorded what happened next. The key question, who had Zoe been trying to call? The number was no longer in service. It had been disconnected weeks after the voicemail was left, and records tied it to a shell company with no traceable identity. But the audio was gold. Zoe's voice, her panic, a traceable moment, and something else. At second 11, just behind her cry, there was a low horn blast, long, distant, unmistakable. A train? Mara scrubbed the audio again. It was faint. But for someone who'd been obsessing over this case, it rang clear as a bell. A freight train at 2:13 a.m. She pulled records. On the night of October 8th, 2017, a single freight line had passed through the Ridgeway South rail spur, an inactive line still used once a week for overnight cargo shipments. The schedule was irregular, and only a few people even knew it existed. But it matched. The train had passed right behind the abandoned freight terminal near Warehouse 6B. Zoe's final scream had been recorded at the exact moment that train passed behind the building Ralston had once leased. It wasn't a coincidence. The audio wasn't just a fragment. It was a location stamp. She pulled satellite images of the area from that night. The cameras were too high res to see detail, but they captured heat signatures. One spot behind the warehouse flared warmer than the surrounding terrain, like a car engine cooling down, possibly a van. It gave her a window, a place, a time. She brought in sound engineers to analyze the audio further. One noted an unusual reverberation, a hollow metal echo that could indicate Zoe was near a shipping container or inside a structure with metallic walls. It would explain the distortion. Mara made a list of every structure on the yard that fit. Warehouse 6B, storage shed E, container 12F, all had been searched, but not dismantled. She got a warrant. 3 days later, a forensic team opened container 12F. It had been padlocked, sealed with rust and neglect. Inside dust, empty crates, spider webs, and in the corner, beneath a false floor panel, A patch of concrete looked different, newer. They drilled 6 inches down. They found it. Blood. Not enough for a body, not enough for visual ID, but just enough to test. It was Zoe's. The news didn't go public. Mara kept it under wraps, long enough to build the case, long enough to trace the burner phone to the purchase order, long enough to find surveillance footage grainy and poor from a gas station 30 miles north of Ridgeway. The footage showed a man with a cap pulled low, paying cash for 2 prepaid flip phones and a gas can. The date was October 6th, 2 days before Zoe disappeared. The purchase was made by a man using the name C. Monroe, same alias used by Eric Ralston to rent the warehouse. It all fit. And now, for the first time, Mara had more than suspicion. She had a chain. She had Zoe's voice. She had blood. And she had a man who had dropped off the map 5 years ago, but never really let go of his obsession. She contacted the U.S. Marshals. Start with the Adirondacks. She told them, look for anything off-grid. Cabins, survivalist communities, former students. Ralston doesn't do cities. He hides where no one looks. Then she sat back and played the voicemail again. No! Stop. Please, I don't know you. The horror in Zoe's voice hit like a punch every time. But Mara forced herself to listen. She needed to carry it, to remember what was at stake. Because Zoe wasn't just a face on a poster anymore. She was a voice that had survived. And that voice was about to bring justice down on the man who thought he'd buried her forever. Eric Ralston wasn't a man people remembered fondly. At Ridgeway, he was once a standout in the behavioral psychology graduate program, brilliant but strange, sharp but socially graceless. He had a way of looking at people like he was watching them through glass, dissecting them without blinking. He published early, led research on psychopathy in digital spaces, and spoke at a campus symposium titled Control, Compliance, and the Digital Mind. Then came the complaints. 2 undergrads said he followed them after class. Another said he waited outside her dorm, never saying anything, just watching. The school handled it quietly, a formal warning, then a leave of absence, then expulsion. No charges, no headlines. Ridgeway buried it. He vanished in 2015. 3 years later, Zoe Sinclair disappeared, and her name had been on his radar long before that night. Detective Mar Ellison now had enough to pull Ralston out of obscurity and into the crosshairs. The voicemail, the burner phone trail, the fake leases, and Zoe's DNA beneath the floor of Container 12F, less than 20 yards from Warehouse 6B, which he'd leased under a false name. Mara put out a nationwide APB under 2 aliases, Eric Ralston and C. Monroe. She knew he'd gone off-grid, but nobody disappears entirely. People like Ralston always needed supplies, always left patterns. It was just a matter of finding them. She brought in the FBI. Within days, they connected Ralston to an abandoned property upstate, registered under a real estate LLC that had paid taxes twice in 5 years. Satellite photos showed a small structure on the edge of a private road, mostly hidden by trees, no mailbox, no utilities. A survivalist hideout. Mara and a tactical team made the drive in unmarked SUVs. The house was in the Adirondacks, 2 miles off the nearest road. Snow crunched under boots as they fanned out in the early morning dark. No heat signature in the house. Windows blacked out. A single van in the back covered in a tarp, half frozen. She moved slowly, gun drawn, the air biting at her lungs. Inside the cabin, the place was eerily silent, sparse. Not a home, but a bunker. Cans of food stacked high, books on social control and manipulation lined the shelves. A loaded rifle sat near the door. In the back room, a mattress, a laptop, 2 prepaid phones, and a wall covered in photos. Photos of Ridgeway, photos of Zoe. Mara's stomach clenched. She moved in, scanning each image. Zoe at the library, Zoe at a cafe, Zoe crossing the quad, unaware she was being hunted. The photos had timestamps. Some were taken weeks before she vanished, others days. The final photo was from the night of October 7th. Zoe walking out of the library, her head down, a coffee in hand. Ralston had been watching, but Ralston was gone. He'd left in a hurry. Water still in a pot on the stove. A journal left behind, open to a half-finished page. She knew. I saw it in her eyes. That flicker of recognition. That moment, she hesitated. I almost didn't act, but she broke the rhythm. That's when I knew I had to. It was a confession, if not to the murder, then at least to the intent. The van was the same model spotted in the grainy footage 5 years earlier. Blue Dodge Caravan. Faded paint. Dent on the rear bumper. The plates were fake. The V, half scratched. But inside the vehicle, under the driver's seat, Mara found the final thread. A flash drive. Back at HQ, the drive revealed hundreds of files, PDFs, photos, maps. But one folder was labeled simply Z. Inside, there were 3 videos. Mara clicked the first one. It showed Zoe sitting in what looked like the back of a warehouse, likely 6B hands tied. Face bloodied, but conscious. The timestamp was October She was crying, whispering something too soft to make out. The second video was static, corrupted. The third video, dated October 9th, was only 6 seconds long. An empty room. The rope left on the floor. Zoe was gone. No body. No sign of what happened next. Mara slammed her fist on the desk. She had everything but the ending. The next day, a hit came through Interpol. A man matching Ralston's description had crossed into Canada on foot near a remote border crossing. No ID, but the photo matched. He'd shaved his beard, dyed his hair, and was going by the name Samuel Hines. Paid cash for everything, rented a room in a motel outside Quebec, stayed 2 nights, then disappeared again. Mara pushed out new alerts, connected with Canadian authorities. She worked through Christmas, missing dinners, ignoring calls from friends. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a ghost she'd refused to let settle. Then, in early January, A ranger in Idaho spotted a man hiking alone through restricted wilderness off trail, carrying too much gear. He reported it. The name the man gave: Carl Monroe. The ranger, suspicious, jotted down the license plate of the nearby vehicle. It traced back to a stolen rental car flagged in Mara's alert system. She was on a plane within hours. When they found him, he didn't run. Eric Ralston was sitting in the snow, cross-legged, facing the trees. The van was parked beside him, open. He was clean-shaven, wearing layered clothes, a heavy coat, and gloves. Calm. When they approached, he smiled and said, "Took you long enough?" Mara cuffed him herself. In the interview room, he confessed without flinching. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said, voice flat. "But she fought. She wouldn't comply." He said she panicked in the warehouse, that he tried to calm her down, but things escalated, that he tied her up to rebuild the trust, that she stopped speaking after a day. "What did you do with her?" Mara asked, dead-eyed. He looked at her. "She's gone." He said, "I let her go, and she didn't make it." He wouldn't say more. No location, no details, just a chilling final admission. Zoe's body was never recovered, but Ralston was charged with first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and obstruction of justice. The jury convicted him in less than 6 hours. The voicemail was played in court. Zoe's voice. Her last words. It was enough. They held the memorial service in late spring, on the Ridgeway University lawn where Zoe used to study on warm afternoons. Hundreds gathered, faculty, students, journalists, people who knew her, people who didn't. They stood in silence under the trees as sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting soft patterns on the grass. Zoe's favorite professor, Dr. Elena Marquez, read a passage from The Glass Castle. Her mother, Karen, could barely get through 2 sentences before breaking down. There was no casket, no urn, just a framed photo on an easel and the whisper of wind through the branches. What haunted everyone wasn't just that Zoe was gone, but that she had been so close. Her dorm just a few hundred yards from where she likely died. Her voice, left behind like a secret carved into time, telling the world what happened, even when her body couldn't. Detective Mar Ellison sat in the last row. She didn't speak. She didn't wear her badge. She just watched, letting the guilt settle over her again. She'd solved the case, but it felt hollow. Justice without a body was a courtroom technicality. Closure with a hole still open in the ground. After the conviction, Ralston was sent to a federal prison in Colorado Solitary for his own safety. He'd agreed to cooperate in exchange for avoiding the death penalty, but his version of cooperation was manipulation, hence half-truths. "You'll find her when you stop trying to prove you're smarter than me," he said in a final interview. "I left something. You just haven't looked in the right place." Mara wanted to strangle him. Instead, she sent teams back to Ridgeway, back to the freight yard, back to the wooded trails and creeks and runoff tunnels nearby. Nothing. No shallow grave, no trace. just empty soil and decaying leaves. Zoe had vanished once. Now, even in death, she remained elusive. Karen and Michael Sinclair stayed in town for another month. Mara met with them every week, updating them on efforts to recover their daughter. Karen kept asking for the same thing. Please, just bring her home. Mara promised again and again. But the leads were drying up. The only new development came from an unexpected source. One of the forensic analysts, a quiet tech named Bryn, had continued reviewing the flash drive found in Ralston's van. Most of it had been analyzed already: documents, surveillance images, journal entries, but buried in the metadata of a folder labeled Old, she found a deleted audio file. It hadn't been overwritten. She recovered it. It was short, 18 seconds, recorded on October 10th at 2 days after Zoe's last confirmed activity. The recording began with footsteps, gravel, then heavy breathing, then Zoe's voice, not panicked, not screaming, calm. If someone finds this, my name is Zoe Sinclair. I don't know where I am, but I think I'm still close to campus. I'm trying to get out. Please. The clip cut off. It wasn't from the voicemail. It was separate, independent, likely recorded on one of Ralston's burner phones, which meant for at least 2 days, Zoe had still been alive. The implications hit Mara like a brick. They had assumed, based on blood, video, and Ralston's own confession, that Zoe had died on the night of October 8th. But if this recording was real, she'd survived longer, maybe escaped, maybe even gotten close to help. That changed everything. They recalibrated the timeline, searched again, this time looking not for remains, but for signs of travel. Zoe may have made it into the woods, the edge of town. Maybe she died from exposure or injury, or maybe Ralston caught her again. That detail he let slip. She didn't make it took on a different meaning. He hadn't killed her outright. She had run. That possibility electrified the search. Mara personally led a fresh team into the forest northeast of Ridgeway, where unused service roads wound through forgotten hiking trails. The terrain was dense, unforgiving, but Zoe was smart, tactical. If she'd made it this far, there had to be something left behind. On the third day, they found her bracelet, tangled in the underbrush, tarnished but unmistakable. A silver charm shaped like a feather. Her mother had given it to her for graduation, and 100 feet beyond that, under a collapsed section of old fence, a decomposed backpack. Inside, Zoe's ID, a cracked phone, a ruined notebook, pages half melted by rain, and a pair of sneakers, stained dark. The remains came 2 days later, buried shallowly beneath tree roots 20 yards away. Wildlife had scattered most of the evidence, but dental records confirmed what they already knew. It was her. Mara didn't cry. She just sat by the dig site as the forensics team worked, staring at the worn ridgeline. Zoe must have climbed before collapsing. Maybe she had run. Maybe she had escaped. Maybe she had left that final message hoping someone would find it. Now she was going home. The second memorial was smaller, family only. But this time, there was a coffin, a place to say goodbye. The Sinclairs had her buried in Phoenix, beneath a tree that bloomed white flowers in spring. Mara flew out to attend. She didn't speak, didn't wear her badge. She just stood beside the grave and whispered, "I'm sorry it took so long." Zoe's case went down as one of the most disturbing in the state's history. A high-profile trial, a years-long search, a voice recovered from silence. It changed Ridgeway forever. Campus safety was overhauled, security doubled, the freight yard was demolished. A garden was planted in its place with a single plaque that read, "For the bright one, you weren't forgotten." Mara didn't stop working cases, but none ever stuck the same way. Zoe had been more than just a victim. She'd been a voice that broke through the static, a presence that refused to vanish. And even in the silence that followed, she left things behind. Proof that she mattered. Proof that she fought. Proof that she never stopped trying to be found. Every so often, Detective Mar Ellison would replay the voicemail. Not out of necessity, not anymore, but because some part of her needed to remember the sound of Zoe's voice. "No. Stop. Please, I don't know you." A single line. One moment frozen in time. A young woman's panic. Caught in the invisible web of digital noise, surviving long after she was gone. It was no longer evidence. It was memory, a keepsake, a scream that wouldn't go quiet just because the case was closed. Zoe Sinclair had become more than a missing person, more than a victim. She was a presence, an imprint. And Mara couldn't walk Ridgeway's campus now without seeing her on benches, at crosswalks, beside the old library steps. She imagined her among the students, headphones in, shoulders tense, backpack bouncing slightly with each hurried step. People asked Mara what kept her working cold cases after everything. She'd say it was the puzzle, the pressure, the pursuit. But the real answer was simpler. She believed in echoes, in the way truth could outlast silence, in the way one person's refusal to be forgotten could change everything. Zoe had proven that. After Ralston's sentencing and the recovery of her remains, there were no more surprises, no dramatic reveals. The monster had been caught, the body found, the story over. But endings don't always feel like closure. Zoe's parents tried to move forward. Karen returned to teaching. Michael retired early and started volunteering at a victim advocacy nonprofit. Their grief no longer screamed, it just sat us quietly beside them every day. Like a shadow they stopped noticing until it moved. Cassie Archer, Zoe's former roommate, never returned to Ridgeway. She transferred schools and changed majors. She later admitted she couldn't walk into a library without feeling a cold knot in her throat. But she stayed in touch with the Sinclairs. Every October 8th, she called Karen and lit a candle at her window. Zoe's boyfriend, Tyler, disappeared from public view entirely. After the trial, he went off social media, left Ridgeway, and stopped responding to press inquiries. His final words to Mara were simple. "I should have walked her home." He carried that with him in the years that followed. Ridgeway changed. The freight yard was gone, replaced by a quiet garden with smooth stone benches and tall grass that swayed with the wind. Students began calling it the quiet, a place to breathe, to reflect. Some left notes under the plaque. Some sat in silence and just listened to the wind. On the plaque beneath Zoe's name were 4 words. She wasn't just a victim. Mara had chosen them because, for all that Zoe had suffered, she had also resisted. She had left messages. She had fought for air, for time, for a voice. Even as her body gave out in the forest, she'd recorded a message, whispered her name, told someone, anyone, that she was still trying to make it back. And because of that, she did. People remembered, not just because she'd vanished, but because she refused to disappear. Ridgeway's law program began awarding the Zoe Sinclair Fellowship, a scholarship given to students focused on victim advocacy and criminal justice reform. It was funded by donations, including anonymous ones from former classmates and professors. It drew headlines, but more importantly, it drew students who wanted to make things better. Each year, Mara attended the award ceremony. She sat in the back, quiet, unassuming, just watching as the next generation spoke of justice with Zoe's name on their lips. One year, the recipient was a young woman who'd grown up in the same Phoenix suburb as Zoe. She didn't know her personally, but she said, "When I read about Zoe, I saw someone who wasn't afraid to speak, even when no one was listening. That's what I want to do. That's what this means to me." Afterward, Mara walked home under the stars, thinking about how stories live on, not just through courtrooms and news coverage, but through people who carry them forward. It was late by the time she reached her apartment. She poured a glass of wine, sat at her desk, and looked again at the folder labeled Z. Not the flash drive files, those had been archived years ago. This was her own collection. News clippings, photos, handwritten notes, timelines, a printout of the voicemail transcript, Zoe's face smiling from a poster. She kept it there not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. A reminder, a voice in the static. Zoe had spoken once more than the world had expected, had left behind the clue that cracked everything wide open, a scream in the night that reached farther than Ralston ever imagined it could. That wasn't just chance. That was survival, even in the smallest form. Some nights, Mara wondered what Zoe would have become. A lawyer, a judge, a woman who changed laws, shaped lives. Maybe she'd have written books. Maybe she would have left Ridgeway and never looked back. She would have mattered. And in the end, she still did. Because even though the forest took her body, even though the years stole her future, her voice remained. It carried forward in courtrooms, classrooms, garden paths, and vigil candles. It carried forward in the detective who wouldn't stop looking, in the roommate who couldn't forget, in the parents who lit up a dark world with memory and mercy, and in every echo of her name that refused to be silenced. Zoe Sinclair had vanished once, but she was never truly gone. Zoe Sinclair's story is a haunting reminder that safety isn't just about locks and lights, it's about awareness, vigilance, and the human responsibility to listen when someone says they feel unsafe. Her case teaches us that even in a world of constant noise, it's often the overlooked signals, the ignored cries, the unanswered texts, the quiet hesitations that hold the truth. It shows how one determined voice, even in fear, can cut through silence and help bring justice. And that persistence by a detective, a family, a friend can turn tragedy into legacy. Most of all, it reminds us to never dismiss fear, never silence survivors, and never stop searching. Thank you for watching and staying with us through Zoe Sinclair's powerful and heartbreaking story. If this kind of true crime storytelling resonates with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future cases that deserve to be heard. Your support helps us keep these stories alive and gives voices to those who can no longer speak. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below with your feedback or let us know what kind of stories you'd like to see next. Every view, like, and share makes a difference.